So, good afternoon, survivors. We've heard quite a bit about the new configuration already over the last couple of days and about YAML and so on. Today we're going to get a little bit more technical. We're on the technical track after all, so let's dive right in. Yours truly, Mikael, senior software engineer at Magnolia. I've been quite involved in the development of this new configuration and also involved on new resources loading cascade in 5.4. Here's the few stages that we have on the road for today. First, I'm going to give a little bit of the story around configuration by file. Then I'm going to show you the new APIs that we crafted around that. And then we'll see how YAML fits into the picture. And well, if time allows, we'll have a couple of demos. So a little bit of context. Well, the master plan is indeed Magnolia 5.4. We wanted to make a release for developers. So the main focus was on ease of development. And here are some of the overarching stories that were either around the feature or they're related. So configuration by file, trouble-free and safe configuration, and also developing sites without knowing Java. And a related story as well was streamlining working with resources, because config files then are resources in the end. In particular, the third one, developing sites without knowing Java. You've heard about light modules. Quick recap again on that. So you can have normal light module structure on a file system, and well, you basically can convert it, have a one-to-one mapping with a full-fledged Maven module. The same directory structure lives under the source main resources. And well, this collects template scripts and configuration together, for example. But first, why configuration by file? Mostly because of the hassles with JCR, to be honest. So yeah, the JCR config is usually quite lengthily crafted in the configuration app, involves many clicks around. Then what you end up getting is some verbose raw JCR exports that we affectionately call bootstrap files. And well, in the end, it's persisted flavor of config, because then you have, well, it's a little bit painful while developing, because you have maybe sometimes to wipe your repo to make sure that your changes still reflect the current state of work, or you have some merge issues if you're working with colleagues, and it's also a little bit painful to upgrade, and that's why we had those version handlers. So your code and config have a chance to get out of sync. So config by file, on the other hand, there are a few concrete promises around it. First, it's the lean readable format. It's YAML, in case you haven't heard. Then it's easy to edit in a simple text editor. As I've shown you in the light module structure, the config files live right next to the template scripts, all in one place. We have file observation, so what you change is instantly reflected. And yeah, most of all, it enables for easier collaboration for the dev teams. In particular, files are easy to diff. You don't have to import, export all over again. And around that, we've also improved the validation capabilities. We're going to see that a little bit when we go through the APIs. So taking again these couple slides, that's what I call it the unfair comparison, because it's not really the same purpose between bootstrap files and YAML files, but well, in the end, yeah, these were those one node and 3 key properties values. In YAML, we have these 4 lines. You've seen that before. And yeah, that's basically what it looks like. So now we're going to look at the APIs, how we overhauled it under the hood. So first thing, we're going to talk about registries. So well, registries have been in Magnolia for a long time. They are typically here to collect various types of elements, such as template definitions or dialog definitions. But up to 5.3, it was not so great. It was a little bit messy. Basically, whenever there was a need for a new registry somewhere, it was mostly duplicated with some fine-tuning maybe. There was basically no common ancestor, and there was always alongside an observing manager that was just looking into the config workspace and updating the changes. And well, all of these were usually duplicated wherever needed. And also the registries, if for some reason the bin resolution would fail, then they would not know about it. You would just get a stack trace, but the registry would completely ignore the entry. So yeah, that's basically the outlook as of 5.3. Mainly reading the configuration from JCR, then reading it through Node2Bin into the managers, and finally populating the registries with it. And also the app, the config app was merely just a content app over the JCR workspace. Now we're putting that a little bit aside, and that's what it looks in 5.4. So we've basically replaced managers by what we call now configuration sources. So we have a JSON configuration source and a YAML configuration source. So we see also there's counterpart to Node2Bin that is introduced, which is called map2bin, because, well, we get a map out of YAML deserialization. So yeah, that's what then we feed into the YAML config source, and in the end we populate the registries. And we've actually built pretty powerful abstraction there, so to keep real registry implementations lean. And you see also the config app is changing scope as well. It's not about telling you what is currently configured in JCR. It's about telling you what is currently present in registries in the system. A quick word also on configuration by code. Could have been also on the diagram before, but basically there's no specific configuration source for the time being for it. But yeah, typically with code, you just inject the registries and register elements directly in there. So for that purpose, we kept a compatibility layer. So that's mostly about it. Just briefly, the API. So yeah, we have basically a registry interface, which mainly exposes what type of elements is currently, is stored in that registry. What metadata builder is used, I'll come back to that in a sec. Then, of course, it provides methods to register elements into it. But what you get out of it is not beans directly. What you get is a definition provider. And the definition provider gives you a hook on the bean, but it's also able to tell you if the bean is valid at all. So if you have errors in your config or some class could not be found, the registry, they still know about it. What is interesting there is that we're gradually increasing knowledge when we load items into the system. So first we create metadata out of the, let's say, a location that is matching a specific pattern. So we can know what is typical module name or what is the relative path within that module name. Then out of this, we load the actual source into what we call the row view. So it's merely a map representation of the content. And then this goes into bean resolution and eventually gets resolved or not. What I was mentioning with those metadata builder, it really boils down to this notion of definition ID. It's basically the reference string that you're usually calling. Let's say when you configure a template, you have this dialog property. It references a dialog, so you have to know which identifier it has. For some objects, it's usually module colon relative path. So that's the case in that example. But yeah, we had typically two approaches that we identified, the other being just identifying items by name, and that's the case for apps. When you start an app, you're not identifying it by pages, colon pages, it's just the name of the app. That's what you configure, let's say, in link fields, for example, and you give it an app name, and that's just a single name. So here's once you chose the strategy for your registry, here's a simple registry implementation. So it extends the powerful abstract registry. And the only things that is left to specify is what definition type it is using and what strategy is it using. So is it using name as ID or module colon relative path as ID? Now, how does that fit with the configuration sources? Well, as I said before, they replace the old managers. So, and basically they're binding themselves to registries. So we have for that a configuration source factory. No need to go through too much details there, but basically we have some good defaults, some conventions to extract or to find the proper definitions in JCR or in YAML. And yeah, usually just binding a config source factory to a registry is a one-liner, as you see here. The bottom line in that is that you can actually implement your own configuration source if you want, let's say, to have config by JSON format or Groovy or whatnot. Then you could actually build upon that. And finally, the minister of registry, as we were calling it in early stages before we had a good name for it. Now it's the registry facade. It's the component that actually knows about all the registries that are currently living in the system. We use juice multi-bindings for that, so we just inject a set of registries. So if you just have a module that comes with a new registry, at least, then it will be seen by default. Well, this interface actually enables you to query definitions by module, or by source, or by type across all registries. And building upon that is the config overview app. So yeah, the APIs that we've shown up till now, it's complete. It's done in 5.4 beta even. The new app, on the other hand, well, we had a little bit of time constraints, but so it was basically designed also for the last few months. And now we have also a nice POC that was implemented by Sasha for it. We'll just take a little bit more time to fine-tune the integration within the product, and we'll eventually bundle it at some point in the life cycle of 5.4. But let's still get a preview of it. So to make sure that, yeah, we'll look at here. So first, yeah, we have this config overview. When we open it, we see just the list of all definitions in the system. We see at least the registries that are exposed by the registry facade. So we see all dialogues currently living in the system, along with which module is serving them. We see also all templates, all apps, whatever. You can filter by which module you are interested in. Let's say I'm going to check the MTE. It comes with 8 dialogues, a bunch of templates as well. You can also group them by module, so probably closer to the normal view that you're used to. Here is the configuration for this config app. Actually, it comes from a JCR node, and you can browse subnodes much like the JCR config actually that you're used to. On the other hand, here is the config for the new resources app. It's done actually from YAML. It says class path, but it's actually a YAML file on the class path. And well, you can also expand it and browse it like in a kind of this node structure, see what is actually in there. But it's actually really a representation of the row view, as I was telling before, and in the end the source file is that YAML file. Then you can also filter which definitions are file-based, and most importantly, which ones are invalid in your system. And here I have one. Apparently, I misconfigured the app class on that file system definition, let's say, and that's where the new validation capabilities come into play, because the registry, they know about the definition, they tell you where the error is, and all you need to do is go ahead and fix it. Off to the YAML format and its integration. First, a word about the spec. So, well, we rely mostly on spec 1.1 more or less incidentally, because the parsing library we use, which is Snake YAML, is actually using it. But anyway, YAML itself privileges indentation over enclosure marks, so it keeps the format lean and readable for a human. And there are essentially 3 types of objects in YAML. There are what they call scalars, which are typical primitives like strings, numbers, booleans. You have sequences, which are typically noted with this dash syntax, and you have mappings, which are just key value pairs, but you can also nest multiple objects in there. You can nest pretty much things in the way you want. It's and have well, that's just the basics. Then how it's integrated with the config is, first we collect all the resources by the matching pattern, as I was telling before. So this is the convention pattern that you see on top, module / definition type / optionally a relative path, and then the name.yaml. Why I'm showing that is because we're also inferring the name. If in case you don't configure it in the YAML file, we're also inferring it from the file name, for example. So here, let's say module / app / resources.yaml, it will register an app with name YAML, even if well, you don't even have to tell it in the YAML file itself. And that leads me also to map to bean. So that's really a cornerstone of the YAML integration. A word about YAML versus JCR, because I cannot talk about map to bean without also comparing the YAML and JCR. So we have map to bean on one hand, node to bean on the other hand. Both they pursue a little bit the same goal. So they serve for bin instantiation, They account for target types for the class property if you set it, and for type mappings as well, those which are registered in your module descriptors. But yeah, that's pretty much about the similarities. On the JCR, you have extends, which we do not yet support in YAML at least, but on the YAML side, you have some additional fancy features, two of them which are part of the specification actually, which are references and merge keys. I'll talk about that in the next few slides. And includes, which is also another directive that we've built on top of the spec. And finally, one must be aware also of the differences to treat lists and maps. When coming from the JCR environment, you don't really need to care, but in YAML you actually do have to care because, well, the syntax is basically different. That's what I'm showing in this next couple of slides here. So here's a typical example for a tab definition. So it has multiple fields. As we see in the API, it's denoted using a list. And well, the JSON node structure is just, well, the fields node and a bunch of subnodes. And in YAML, well, because it's a list, we have to use the dash syntax. Now, where it gets a little bit confusing maybe is that, well, in JSR, you never had to care. Here is an example using a map now for actions. And this one was basically, looks basically exactly the same in JSR, but on YAML, you have to use the mapping syntax, so that's important. We might close the gap in the future and be tolerant regarding this type of configurations, but at least if you start now using it, that's one of the pitfalls you have to be aware of. And in depth, always look into the definitions. Then, yeah, a bunch of advanced YAML features. First, part of the spec is document references. So, well, you can point to further references in the same document only. So you would typically mark one element with an anchor, and not for another element, you basically point to it with this kind of pointer syntax. Quite similar is the concept of merge keys. It's essentially, well, the same. You still declare the anchor, but we have this kind of double caret syntax that enable to also, it's good for appending properties or nodes to another node in the YAML structure. It's not necessarily that good if you want to do complex extents with a bunch of overriding bunch of subnodes. So careful about that. And finally, I was mentioning the include directive. So the goal here is that you should still be able to modularize your YAML files, not copy-paste all around the place. It's Magnolia specific, and it's plugged in at the YAML reader level, and basically caters to external file references. And well, that's pretty much the syntax. So we have this exclamation mark include, which is just signifies a directive for the YAML parser. And then yeah, we give the path to another resource. And it can be in a generic directory so that it's not picked up accidentally by, let's say, the app registry or whatnot. So there you have just an example column. And yeah, off we go with then the demo of what the typical workflow is when using configuration by file while developing. So I'll take the example of the new resources app that we created using YAML. So here is it. And well, in there we're gonna see, well, typical content app. So we have a workbench, we have some columns. Let's say we want to change that column. Let's say we want to add a read-only icon for those resources which are read-only. By default, we have none. So we jump to Eclipse, or to the IDE anyway. I have the project checked out on the left-hand side. So you see the resources YAML file. And so I'm already editing it. You see I'm using this new Boolean property column definition. It's a useful tool to specify simple icon or simple text for Boolean properties within trees. So I'm just setting now the false icon to edit icon read-only. And yeah, I'm going to save it and then wait for the console to log that the definition is re-registered. Yeah, that's done now. So I can go back to the admin central, close the app, open it again, and off we go. I have this read-only icon, and that's ready. I just have to now commit it and done. Famous last words. the journey only begins. So we've built solid foundations to making more steps incrementally on top of that. First, we've only updated selected registries so far, hopefully the most important ones, but that's basically templates, dialogues, apps, those few guys. We will also update further registries in the very near future, such as personalization traits or REST endpoints, so that you can configure all of these things with YAML as well. We will also try to move typical configurations, those that currently don't live in registries but just rely on Node2Bin. We'll probably want to move them to registries as well, like the app launcher layout. Currently, you still have to do that in JCR. And finally, we'll work also on productizing and eventually bundling the new config overview app. And if you were there last year, you might have a question. How about auto-suggest? Well, first it was JCR only, and we didn't. In the end, we didn't want to spend effort into improving JCR, while at the same time being convinced of the improvements of what that YAML brings on the other side. So we'll be looking to that in the future, see how we can bring also auto-completion in YAML in a code editor, for example. There are options for that, but at least we didn't want you to have to make a choice whether I want to use auto-suggest or YAML. So it's on par, and hopefully that will come in the future. And with that, I thank you.